This lecture is all about the mitochondria, my favorite organelle. So eukaryotic cells have a structure called the mitochondria as an organelle inside of the cell. It's wrapped in not one but two membranes. And its primary function is the production of energy. It takes breakdown products from our food and converts them to a molecule called ATP. ATP is critical for powering chemical reactions inside the cell. The mitochondria has other functions as well. They're not as well known as it being the powerhouse of the cell, which is probably something you've heard before. But the mitochondria also is involved in heat production. So we're warm-blooded. We keep a relatively constant body temperature. Mitochondria are important in that. Mitochondria also are involved in calcium storage and regulation, some parts of the immune response, and regulation of a process called apoptosis, which is a specialized form of cell death that can happen when cells get damaged beyond repair. It's a way for the cell to kill itself without damaging other cells in the area. The primary energy inside the cell is ATP. So you can see an image of ATP up here. You don't need to know what it looks like. I just wanted to show you the pretty picture. ATP is used in the short term for immediate needs. It is not a very stable molecule. It doesn't last long term, so you can't use it for long-term storage. Our cells constantly produce ATP because we're constantly using ATP. If we have an excess of ATP, our cells might make this carbohydrate called glycogen. This is particularly true in muscle tissue. Glycogen is used as a medium-term energy storage. And of course, long-term energy storage is in the form of fats in specialized cells called adipose cells. So if you're being active, say you're exercising, your cells are going to use up ATP. They're going to use that up first. If you keep exercising, then your muscles will switch and start breaking down glycogen. They take the glycogen to make new ATP. That's very important. They make more ATP. They don't just use the glycogen directly. If your muscles run out of glycogen, well, pretty much you're going to stop exercising at that point. You're going to get to the point where, you've seen marathon runners at the Boston Marathon throwing up at the finish line. They have depleted their glycogen stores. Mitochondria use oxygen in order to produce ATP. This process, this energy production, also releases carbon dioxide as a waste product. So this is why we breathe. We inhale oxygen to make ATP and exhale carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of energy metabolism. The number of mitochondria in a specific cell depends on the energy use of that cell. So some of our cells, like adipose tissue, don't do very much. They're not very metabolically active. They're not going to have a lot of mitochondria. Muscles, on the other hand, need a lot of energy. And so they're going to have a lot more mitochondria in their cells. And in fact, if you are a very active person who works out a lot or has a very active lifestyle, you're going to have more mitochondria in your muscles than if you were sitting on the couch playing video games or watching TV. Now, if there's not enough oxygen around, the cell can make a small amount of oxygen a small amount of ATP without oxygen. The lack of oxygen is called anaerobic conditions. Aerobic refers to air, specifically oxygen. When you see that AN in front of a word, a scientific word, that means without. So anaerobic is without oxygen. Aerobic energy metabolism makes lots and lots of ATP. Anaerobic makes small amounts of ATP. There's a limit to how much ATP cells can make in the absence of oxygen. And cells will run out of stored energy and start dying within about 3 minutes due to lack of oxygen. So you cannot survive for more than about 3 minutes without oxygen. Your cells require that to make enough ATP just for their basic functions. Single-celled organisms, on the other hand, can survive longer without oxygen. And they do this using a process called fermentation. Yeast are single-celled eukaryotes that use fermentation in the absence of oxygen to make more energy. One of the waste products of fermentation is alcohol. There are a few others, but alcohol's, that's one we're really interested in, right? So we use yeast when we're making beer, wine, and things like sourdough bread. The process of fermentation, just like other kinds of metabolism, energy metabolism, releases carbon dioxide, and that forms the bubbles in beer and the holes or spaces within bread. If we use bacterial fermentation, bacteria can do this process as well, but we use it to make things like soy sauce, vinegar, yogurt, cheese. Which types of bacteria we use influences the taste of these products, so it can make a big difference in the type of product that you end up with. There are bacteria that prefer to live in the absence of oxygen. It turns out that oxygen can be harmful to our cells. So aerobic, oxygen-using energy metabolism is inherently harmful. So our cells have lots of mechanisms to reduce this risk. One of them are antioxidants. Your cells make plenty of antioxidants unless you have a genetic disorder. So advertisers try and convince you to buy products with antioxidants in them, but here's the thing. Too much antioxidants in your cells can also cause problems. So trust your cells to make all the antioxidants they need. Now, mitochondria, we tend to think of them kind of like the upper left picture there, the pancreas picture. But each one of these images is an electron micrograph of mitochondria in a different type of cell, or even a different organism. The shapes can be different in different organs based on their energy needs, or in different species based on their energy needs. They also change shape under various conditions, including when cells are dying during apoptosis. And the primary way we get more mitochondria is that they divide, and they kind of look like dumbbells. And so if you see an image of that, it's going to look different than the the typical image of a mitochondria. They can also do things like fuse together if the cells don't need as many mitochondria, or how the slide was prepared for microscopy can have an effect on the way the mitochondria look. So there are lots of different things that influence the appearance. The last thing I want to talk about in this lecture is the origin of mitochondria and the origin of eukaryotic cells. So, eukaryotic cells, cells with a nucleus, arose from an ancient archaea prokaryotic cells. Remember, I mentioned that prokaryotic cells, cells without a nucleus, are either bacteria or archaea. And they're very, very different. It's kind of like the difference between plants and animals. It's actually a bigger difference than that, but you get the idea. So this ancestral archaea engulfed a bacterial prokaryotic cell and did not digest it. So a lot of archaea will eat bacteria, but for whatever reason, this archaea did not digest the bacteria. And over time, that bacteria cell evolved to become the mitochondria in the modern eukaryotic cell. This is called the endosymbiotic theory. Endo meaning inside, symbiotic, a symbiotic relationship, a relationship where two different organisms work or live together to the benefit of both. The archaea contributed the nuclear genetic material and a lot of the biochemistry of the cell, and the mitochondria provided enough energy for that eukaryotic cell to get bigger, to grow and produce organelles, and eventually to become a multicellular organism. So, the endosymbiotic theory of mitochondria origins states that mitochondria and chloroplasts are the site of photosynthesis in plants, arose from bacteria. We have evidence of this. First off, both mitochondria and chloroplasts are very similar to bacteria in size and structure. Both of these organelles have an inner membrane that looks like a bacterial membrane and an outer membrane that looks like a eukaryotic or archaic cell membrane. Mitochondria and chloroplasts have genetic material that looks more like bacteria genetic material. It forms a circular loop instead of a double helix. And their DNA has characteristics that are more like what you see in prokaryotes. They divide in a manner similar to bacterial cell division. So we've got all of these different characteristics that tell us that mitochondria used to be bacteria. But now they're important for us. One last thing I want to say to make sure this is completely clear, because when I was learning this, I got confused a little bit. All multicellular organisms have mitochondria. Okay, I think there's like one exception out of the millions of known species of life on Earth. Same thing is true with eukaryotic cells. Even if you're a single-celled eukaryote, most of them are going to have mitochondria. Plants, in addition to mitochondria, have chloroplasts, which are a different type of organelle. So plants have both mitochondria and chloroplasts. So that's kind of the highlight of my favorite organelle. And I keep calling it my favorite organelle, which suggests that there might be a lot of questions on it on the quiz.